Most greenhouse operators simply ventilate the outside air through their facility because they know that if the CO2 diminishes, plant growth diminishes with it, and plants die. CO2-enriched operations are presently quite rare. Also, nobody really knows to what extent the productive power of the biosphere can be increased by simply increasing the CO2 concentration. During the age of the dinosaurs, the atmospheric CO2 concentration is known to have been 6 to 7 times higher than it is today. It evidently created that kind of lush vegetation that enabled the colossal creatures to exist. Some of the dinosaurs were truly colossal, up to 190 feet in length, weighing 360,000 pounds. It evidently takes a highly productive biosphere to feed these giant creatures that were for man in comparison. It wasn't just the warm climate that produced their food for them. The critical factor was in the air. The critical factor was CO2. In the very early times when land-based plants began to develop, around 500 million years ago, the atmospheric CO2 was 15 to 20 times stronger than it is today. For all we know, land plants might not have developed without this high CO2 concentration. It might be possible in future times to operate large-scale greenhouse facilities at this high concentration. In fact, it might become necessary to do this. Our dangerously low CO2 level will likely diminish past the cutoff point, where many plants cease to be productive. All 4 of the major models that are presented on this chart, in spite of the variations between them, all converge at the present starvation level. It is known that in cold climates, under Ice Age conditions, our currently low level becomes further reduced. It is believed that it dropped below the 150 mark during the last glacial period. The resulting biological cutoff might have resulted in the minuscule world population of 1 to 10 million coming out of the last Ice Age glaciation period. Our biosphere desperately needs more CO2 for its real potential to be realized. Unfortunately, this need is presently only fulfillable in artificial environments. The atmospheric CO2 has shrunk to a mere 2% portion of the global stores. The remaining 98% is located diffused in the deep oceans from where it gets slowly cycled back through the atmosphere, and a small portion is located in vegetation. A third of the atmospheric CO2 is recycled every year. The atmosphere holds 750 billion tons of CO2, and the oceans 38,000. Of these, slightly less than 100 billion tons are cycled between the atmosphere and the oceans per year. CO2 becomes absorbed in the cold Arctic regions and is released in the tropics in a never-ending interchange. The high release factor in the tropics makes the surface of the tropical ocean CO2 deficient. Another 100 to 125 billion tons of CO2 is also cycled between the air and vegetation, according to the botanic requirement. Since the recycling process is highly temperature sensitive in both areas, the equilibrium between the air, soil, and the ocean is always changing. The man-made contribution is too minuscule to have any effect on the large dynamics of this recycling pattern. It would be wonderful if we could affect this enormously large recycling system. Our atmospheric CO2 is presently at the lowest level in 250 million years, if not in all of the history of life on this planet. Of course, all of this is known in the science communities. Nevertheless, the CO2 hoopla is created to scare humanity with tales about too much CO2, while the opposite is the case. The evident goal is to drive the unweary humanity into self-submission to the ideological dictates of the masters of empire that are aimed at decimating society with increased starvation, and so forth. The global warming doctrine is built on layers upon layers of lies, all centered on lies about CO2, which is not a climate factor at all. The world doesn't have too much CO2. It suffers a lack of it. The grand lies about CO2 are evidently all intentional. They are upheld, even while the inconvenient truth about the climate dynamics can no longer be hidden. Thus, they are being propped up by more and more lies, decades of lies. This concert of lies takes us back to the 1990s, when the global warming hoopla exploded into a celebration of universal fraud. One of the statements that were heard at the time was that it is really a matter of personal choice to determine where the right balance lies between being honest and being effective in fulfilling the empire's goals. This is like saying that if one must lie to achieve an end, one is free to do so as a matter of personal choice. Thus lies flooded the world scene in ever greater streams. This went on for more than a dozen years already. When the stench oozed through from the background, by leaked emails and reports, the fraud became so obvious that it blew up the 2009 Copenhagen Climate Change Conference so that none of the chosen objectives were achieved. And those were planned to be the most horrid yet. They called for an international tax to be levied to finance a military force for the UN that would have the mandate to beat all nations into submission who refused to meet the population targets, deindustrialization targets, and other grisly targets for murderous curbs on energy use and livestock elimination. Once the lie set up asking, any murderous program can be built on its platform. Since the global warming dogma is a lie from the ground up, imposed by empire, the breakout from it can only be achieved in the form of a breakout from empire itself, which is a citadel of lies. The banner of empire reads, "In lies we trust." Its lies are that CO2 is the #1 greenhouse gas, that mankind is increasing the CO2 and overheating the earth, that global warming is killing us, that the next glaciation cycle is not potentially before us, that uranium wars are harmless and infinitely expandable, that mankind has outgrown its resources for living, that there is no electric energy in space, that our sun is a fusion furnace, that wars and diseases are desirable to reduce population to conserve resources, that looting is the way to riches, that terror, war, poverty, starvation, genocide are not the product of empire, and the list goes on and on. The breakout from this vast field of lies is possible. It begins with noting the banner under which humanity presently lives, the banner of empire, in lies we trust. The banner tells us that all the great tragedies that are tearing humanity to the ground are intentional and imposed for one single reason, to enable empires to exist that have no fundamental principle to stand on. All of the huge imperial projects that are presently tearing the world apart are strung out under this banner. They are built on lies by intention, which are all designed to uphold and protect an imperial structure that cannot exist in the sunshine of a normally developing humanity. Neither can humanity exist under the resulting stranglehold by empire. It is becoming increasingly plain that the whole of humanity is doomed under this yoke. However, it is not possible to break away from this yoke on the ground of addressing the tragedy as a collection of single issues of economics, philosophy, ideology, and sheer insanity. One gets lost in their convoluted jungles so that nothing ever gets resolved. That's why nothing has been resolved for hundreds of years. The resolution has to begin with tearing the banner down, in lies we trust. In order to tear the banner down, we need a bigger impetus to mobilize our human capacities that have been kept intentionally dormant under the banner of senseless babbling. The Ice Age challenge that is dawning on the horizon before us has the kind of quality as an imperative that can get us all out of the easy chair of small-minded thinking and awaken the dormant humanity in the world. Once this awakening begins, it will not only tear down the banner of empire, but it will replace it with the banner of an awakening humanity, in truth we trust. Once this banner is hoisted, all the links are broken to the structures of lies that become irrelevant on their own, as truth is a quality that is knowable, as the term truth implies. This does not mean that we must let go of economics, philosophy, ideology, and scientific reason. The new banner implies that we give all of these a truthful dimension. We find our wealth in what we produce for human living. That's real economics. We become committed to this reality principle as nothing else qualifies. We also establish truth in philosophy. Instead of seeing ourselves as a cancer on the earth that eats up its resources, we recognize ourselves as discoverers and creators and producers of ever more resources for living that don't exist naturally. Under the new banner we replace the imperial ideology of war and destruction with a humanist ideology of cooperative unity and industrial automation that enables us to transform and uplift our world from poverty to the quality of a renaissance with free housing, education, healthcare, and so on, both because this is easy to do and because it is a pleasure to do the human thing that enriches our living. Likewise, under the banner of truth we will overturn the global warming fraud for poverty and starvation, and replace it with a humanist renaissance of such power that the return of the Ice Age cannot touch us whenever it comes. Under the truth banner we will build bridges spanning the oceans to develop Africa and the world, because the truth is that we have this capability already, with the materials and energy resources that we have on hand. Under the truth banner we will green the deserts with freshwater resources that presently flow unused into the sea, because the truth is that the principles do exist to easily channel the outflow of the Amazon River through arteries submerged in the oceans to Africa as a resource to turn the Sahara into a garden of life for human living, and into an oasis that the coming Ice Age cannot touch. Under the truth banner floating agriculture will be laid down as naturally as we have laid highways across the lands, because the truth is that automated industrial production can produce the floating modules for agriculture almost hands-free, for a boundless food resource for humanity, and for the preservation and advancement of the natural world in places that the Ice Age cannot reach. Under the truth banner inspired by the Ice Age challenge, a comprehensive industrial, economic, and cultural revolution will unfold with advanced new materials that enable a freedom in design and in power and productivity that presently challenge the imagination. And the revolution will begin in the vast empty waste places where large-scale development with new industries is easily possible. We will even see the rapid development of floating cities to service the new floating agriculture, because under the banner of truth nothing less would be logical, as the capability for it exists already as a truth. The resulting food abundance will then also become reflected in abundance in quality, because the truth is that the two are linked and are a part of the true dynamics of our humanity that has itself no limit.